No,
This Saturday?
this Saturday. Uh, Oh, there you go.
We're unmuted. Apologies to those of you in the room. Thank you, everybody, for being here. This is the fourth, I got it right this time. This is the fourth of 6 town halls that the Board of County Commissioners is doing across the county this year. First time we've done these since 2019. And there are a couple of reasons that we're restarting them this year. One is we've got 2 new board members that really want to get out and know the community better, as well as we have shared values on making sure that we're in the community more. And we have important things that we want to talk to you about. So we've got a presentation for you about Clear Creek County's service sustainability. Colton Roloff, our new deputy county manager, is going to be sharing that. And then we'll just open it up for general questions about what kinds of county services you expect and what you're seeing in the community that you want us to be working on, that we need to be aware of, etc. We're just going to start with some commissioner intros. I'm somehow now the old guy on the block, so you might know me a little better, but the things I've been assigned to are I'm the county's one of the county's representatives to the Clear Creek Fire Authority Board. I've been working closely on making sure we have a great fire department, that we're working on fire mitigation. I work a lot and care a lot about behavioral health and healthcare. I'm on the board of the Jefferson Center for Mental Health. I do some healthcare advocacy with the state. Was a part of getting this building constructed to bring a primary care doctor back to the county. I'm assigned to the Gateway to the Rockies Opioid Commission. This is working on opioid abatement work. Our attorney general sued a bunch of pharmaceuticals, got a bunch of money, and we're using that money to help do something about all the opioid deaths we're seeing in this community and around the state. Done a lot of work on housing. We have a multi-jurisdictional housing authority we just formed last year. The municipalities are contributing as well. So they've been doing a lot of work on housing and childcare, where we're making the first childcare investments that this community has seen from our local governments. Really excited about that and handing that off to Jody, who is enthusiastic and knows a lot in this space. I've also just been working a lot on the county budget, trying to find savings, trying to find revenue opportunities, talk to the state about having better tax proposal authority, which is something we can talk about later, and just trying to level up our county government. You might have noticed there's a lot of new faces in Clear Creek County's government. I think everybody that we've hired that's on the team has brought a perspective that's been really helpful, and I think we're seeing just really excellent service out of them. And the folks that are still here are here for a reason, right? It's because we've got a lot of confidence in them to continue to provide the services that they have to you all and the team for a long time. So that's who I am, what I think I've been up to. Jody, Rebecca, who wants to go next?
Hi, thanks for coming. I see some familiar faces. Thanks for coming back. And I'm Rebecca Lloyd. I come from the east end of the county. I'm pretty much on the border with Jefferson County, so about as far east as you can get. But I've been working very hard to go all over the county to meet as many people as I can and get up to speed on the issues of concern to our county. I'm a former lawyer. I guess I'm still a lawyer, but not practicing right now, obviously. So I bring that background both in litigation, environmental law, and I worked in the oil and gas industry as corporate counsel. So I bring business and litigation to my background here. I've been working really hard with CDOT, the I-70 Coalition, the I-70 Collaborative Effort to work on, impressing upon CDOT that Clear Creek is here, we're here to stay. They can't just pave over our county because that would be easier for them. So working very hard to protect our interests. In a related matter, we all worked with the state government and the governor to be able to pass the Jake break legislation that makes the trucks coming down our highway, I-70, use their mufflers, not wake everybody up at 2 a.m. because they like the sound of reverberating across the canyon walls. We also got permission or the state allowed vendors to help truckers chain up. So they're less likely to jackknife during snowstorms and miscellaneous icy bad conditions. So, and also working with Dr. Cog and that's the Denver Regional Council of Governments, which we're basically a part of because of I-70. So they raise funds, they have funds to contribute to counties. And so we're a member of that in order to bring money back into the county. Same with the Colorado Counties Incorporated, which is an organization of all the counties in the state, one county, one vote. We participate because we want to make sure that the state doesn't impose unfunded mandates. As a county, you shall do this. We're not going to give you any money, but you shall do this. So we work with the state to not have that happen to us, and also to make laws that are beneficial to our county. And we're all working very hard on the budget, as you will hear in this meeting. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Jody Hartman Ball. I represent the District 3, which is the West End. I am new as well as Rebecca. I am taking over some of George's stuff. He has about 1.5 years left. So he has been busy training me on CC4CA, the childcare, so we can move into this and have a better transition. Childcare is something that George got started at the beginning of the year. It's kind of been a thing for me for a really long time. Lori Beckel was involved in it for a while. And we're hoping to continue that. We just discussed how we're going to deal with the childcare this year. And I think what's going to happen is we'll put the money into scholarships because there's not a facility actually to fund. So that's where that's going. And
Right now, there may be in the future.
it'll be for this fall. They still have a little bit of money left over that they're going through with the summer. I also wanted to say with CCI, we talked to Airbnb, which a lot of people here will be happy. They are working with us now so that we can get control over some of the STRs that are unregulated. They don't have the licensing. So they kicked off 37 of them in Clear Creek County, which is like a big deal for us because that was our big fight with VRBO, Airbnb, and some of the others. So if we have Airbnb on board, we're hoping to get VRBO and get everybody. So, we don't have like 10 of them in one neighborhood. We have neighborhoods where there's one person that lives there.
That's left.
All the rest of them, they have no neighbors, and it's kind of isolating for some people. I'm part of NOCO, which is the Northern Counties, and that's kind of trails recreation management, and it's not anti-OHV. It's more of a management program, but Clear Creek is kind of moving more into not making more trails for OHV. We're wanting to protect what we have. So we're hoping to, Colton's going to be part of this. We're going to talk to them the 26th, and we need more maintenance for the bathrooms that we have for our trails. We've got trailheads that we've had troubles with the new bathrooms that were installed. And so we're going to apply for a grant, and that will be a partnership with them. After that, maybe next year, we'll look into some more trail maintenance so that when the people come up, they can have some signs, and then we can get them into town to spend some money. Because right now they're coming up, they're going to the trails, they're getting hurt. It's costing us money, but if we can get them into town and, do some recreational stuff, go to the ice cream shop, maybe build some trails closer to town would be a nice idea that NOCO's talked about instead of out. I think a lot of stuff that we bring people here to Clear Creek requires a helmet. And, if you think about the rafting, the zip lining, it's a lot of helmet stuff. So if we can kind of change the way we're doing stuff, we're also changing the way we are doing our tourism. Instead of keep drawing people in, our visitors now are from the Denver metro area. That's where most of the people are coming. So we are talking to the businesses with the economic development team, the tourism board, so that we can let them know, not everybody's coming up to buy a Colorado t-shirt anymore. So they're coming up for experiences. And if you ever go to Frothy Cup, it's busy. those are the things that they like, you know, the food industry, the breweries do really good. I have a shooting range update for those of you that are sick of the shooting around, the illegal shooting. The Devil's Canyon is supposed to open July 23rd, and it's a soft opening, so there won't be somebody there manning it for now. They're still trying to work that out. And then the one in Dumont has been delayed again, and I think they're looking at the rec center to run that one, and that's going to be in October. So once we get the Devil's Canyon open, immediately there's going to be an order that's signed that's going to shut down all the identified, and they've already, the pre-ones have already been identified. So that might move people around to your neighborhood or my neighborhood if it's not already identified. And then that's where you need to go to the website. Are we going to attach that to the counties?
Are you talking about the map?
Yeah, there's a map, and then there's going to be a thing that you can put in a complaint.
Okay, I've got the
So-
map on the website and I'll add the complaint one.
Okay,
Yep.
so that way you're not calling the sheriff all the time. You can put on the complaints and say, hey, we've got shooting in this neighborhood. This should be another shutdown area, and then they'll come up and look at it.
Where do we find the map?
It's on the website under the Clear Creek Shooting Range. If you just Google Clear Creek Shooting Range or something like that, it'll come up and you'll find it.
Yeah, I mean, we have people shooting at propane tanks.
Oh.
And in fire
Yeah.
season, it's going to be bad. We've already had one fire started.
Wow.
So yeah, not really good. And then I wanted to talk about, did you say the 1041s that we signed are gonna extend the toll hours and days?
The peak period shoulder lengths.
Yeah, so hopefully that will alleviate some. That's something that we worked with CTI, so what is it?
CTIO.
CTIO. That is something that we kind of negotiated stuff, and we've asked for monitoring, air monitoring, water monitoring, and noise. And so hopefully we'll start getting some data back. We had quite a few people that worked really hard to really stick those in there so that we can keep our people safe here and know what's going on.
So did you say they're gonna open up the toll lanes more often
Yeah, and more days.
and more?
So longer times and more days. They're adding some flex days too. So if Wednesday, all of a sudden just it's 100 degrees and everybody's headed to the hills, they can open it up as long as they have X amount of days left. So was that it? I think that's it for me.
Before we go to Colton, I just want to add some color to a couple of things that Jody mentioned. Thank you. You mentioned a lot. There's so much going on in the county. It's hard to figure out how to prioritize. The childcare work. You probably are wondering, some of you may be wondering, how are we investing in childcare while we're talking about a budget crisis? It's a good question. I'll answer it before you have to ask it. We collect a lodging tax. We collect a 2% lodging tax in the county. Historically, it only was available for tourism marketing. And a few years ago, counties, including myself, went to the legislature and asked for that to be changed so that we can also invest in housing and childcare. And so the voters voted to approve after the states gave us that authority. We asked the voters, and the voters said, yeah, we think you shouldn't use this money for housing and childcare. So that's where we're getting that. When we talk about our budget crisis, we're really talking about the general fund, which is where we fund the sheriff's office and human services and where we do all of our planning department and pretty much everything else the county does. And then on the Airbnb thing, I wanted to just mention that's also the result of a state law. The state counties went and asked, the state said, yes, we think you should be able to directly regulate the platforms. We did not have this authority until a year and a half ago, roughly. And so the last board updated our ordinance so that we can directly regulate the Airbnbs and the VRBOs. So that when someone's violating our rules, Airbnb just takes them off. We don't have to like chase them around in civil court, which is a very long and frustrating process that you have limited success in. So I just wanted to add a little bit more context to those
And
two
they
things.
have a lot of money to lobby against this group. So that was a lot of work that going up against Airbnb and to be successful with that.
It was a big fight. And we got there. So
I wanted to say too, the housing authority is also funded the same way. And that is multi-jurisdictional. So that's Idaho Springs, Georgetown, Silver Plume, and Empire. They all put money into the pot. And then the money that comes from Clear Creek comes from that lodging tax too. So we split, half of it goes to tourism to promote tourism. And then that other half gets split in half again. So half goes to childcare, half goes to housing, because housing and childcare are our two biggest needs here that, we're trying to work on.
Awesome. Okay. No. So Colton is going to talk about, he's prepared a presentation about the sustainability of our services.
Okay, pop it up. Real quick introduction. If I haven't met you yet, or you haven't seen me talk, my name is Colton Roloff. I live on Floyd Hill with my son Cohen and my wife Jenny. I've been in the county for about 5 years. Over the course of my life, I've lived in 31 places, and this is the first one I've ever considered home. So this presentation we're about to go through is very personal to me too, as a resident of the county, and the challenges that we're about to face. So I want to have an open conversation. This is a long presentation for people who have been through it once. I glutton for punishment, I think. But if you have questions, please ask them in the moment, right? Because if you're confused about something at the front, it might just make the rest of the presentation more confusing. So please raise your hand, interrupt, and I'll answer the best I can.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Megan. I'm the Public Information Officer. If you are watching online or on Facebook, please join the Zoom. I just commented it on the Facebook. And if you join there, you can raise your hand and ask a question. I just wanted to say that to our online people.
And I am sorry, Colton, we got to pause because I didn't introduce staff. We have in the back, we've got Brian Bossart, the county manager. Not our staff, but you should know Jeremy Jones is on city council and he's the assistant fire chief. He's in the room. And yeah.
And I just want to say one more thing. Sorry, I'm being annoying because I have people here that can listen to me. There is a ton of flyers back there. Please grab them. My business card is also back there. If you have any questions about anything or you don't know where to go or anything to do with the county, give me a call, shoot me a text. I will point you in the right direction. If not, answer that right then and there. So just wanted to make you guys know that. There's also a sign up sheet and you can sign up for the newsletter back there as well.
Okay.
We're going to give your backup.
Well, I already did the presentation back up. If you don't have a printout of the presentation, they're back there on this table. I would recommend getting one because some of the text might be a little small on these things. So we'll start off with kind of the title, right? The title is kind of a big deal, right? Because it doesn't say budget anywhere in here. This is about sustainability, right? A budget is a year-over-year document about expenses and revenue, right? What we're talking about is long-term sustainability, right? This is about trend lines. This is about where we're heading, right? To try to think about the future, not necessarily next year, okay? And what we're going to talk about is kind of where we're at, how we're looking at the problem, and what our options are. And towards the end, we're going to see some very generic modeling of how some of these solutions affect taxpayers, right? So we'll get all there in due time, but this is really about service sustainability. Can we sustain and how do we sustain over the next 20 years the operations in the county? Next slide. Okay, so the big one is where did the problem come from, right? So we have a pretty large fall off in our property tax collection, right? This is primarily how counties are funded, right? Property taxes come from a lot of sources, and since 2015, we have dropped $15 million, right? And just for example, that is more money than we currently collect in property tax, right? We've had 2 tax increases since then, a 0.65% sales tax to fund EMS and a 1% sales tax to fund road and bridge. The issue, as we'll talk about later, EMS dental. Oh, emergency services. It's the ambulance service. That total is 4.5 million, right? That's what those 2 tax revenues generated, right? You'll notice that leaves us with a net loss of nearly $10 million. The reason that's not a straight subtraction in number is because there's some county services that are not coming back, right? So that's not part of one of our structural issues that we're issuing to solve. But we're still operating in this deficit, right? Of this tax revenue fall off, right? So that's what we're going to talk about is what the county has done to talk about that delta and address it, but also what we can do going forward, right? So the commissioners give staff a goal list. This is not the inclusive list, but this list does talk about the things we're working on this year that are primarily around the budget, okay? The first one is a facilities assessment. This is really around looking at our fixed assets, our buildings, okay? The marginal cost or the cost of operating a building isn't that expensive generally. It's just electricity and gas. It's pretty marginal in the scope of a budget, but it's a huge amount of capital liability. And what that means is at some point you got to replace a roof. You got to replace an HVAC system. You got to replace something that's hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars. So what we're looking to do with the assessment is look at all of our buildings, make sure that they're being run efficiently, staffed efficiently, and if we can consolidate and unload some of them, we need to get that capital liability off the books, right? Because it affects the long-term sustainability of our financial situation. The second one is the jail. Okay, so currently the jail operates in what's called a arrest confinement processing model. Arrest processing confinement model, which means when people are arrested, they get processed in the jail and held in that jail, right? There are other options. There are other counties in Colorado that have gone to strictly a processing model, which means that people are arrested and processed, but then they are transported to a different jurisdiction to be held in a neighboring county, right? And the county pays them, that neighboring county, to hold them, right? So what we're going to look at this year is looking at the financial impact of transitioning to a different model, right? And how much money that could potentially save or not save. Because there are transportation costs, there are other issues that come up with that kind of service. So we're going to try to be as objective as possible on what's the best return on investment and financial solution for the county on that front. A high-level staffing analysis is the other thing we're working on. We're picking 2005 because for two good reasons. One is there was a huge ramp up of hiring that started in 2005. The FTE count of the county started really going up and up and up and up and up around that time. The other issue is it's exactly 20 years ago. Does anyone know how many people lived in the county 20 years ago compared to?
Like about 5,000. Oh, in the county, never mind.
It's exactly the same, right? And then in this state, that's extremely rare. Denver's grown 42% in that time. Summit County has grown more than that, right? All of our neighboring counties have grown double digits, if not more, in that same year period, and we haven't, right? So our tax base, residents and otherwise, has not changed a whole lot, while our visitor count, our liability on 70, all these other things keep growing and growing and growing and growing and growing, right? Because we've been largely stagnant as population base. The other reason is there has been a huge FTE drop since 15, right? We have reduced staff and we need to see what services are now not operating well, what services still could potentially be reduced more, and what we are or are not doing compared to 2005, right?
And
To take a
FTE is
full-time equivalent, right? So FTE
personnel.
is a person, right? It's a 40-hour-a-week work block, right? You can either have 4 people working 10 hours for one FTE, right? Or one person working 4. It's basically a way to normalize people as staff, right?
People are now working 32 hours a week. Are you considering that an FTE?
Because we did not pay them their compensation adjustment.
Yeah, right,
So
I
we're paying
understand why
less,
that.
right, yeah. So we are paying less.
And another question about how the population in the county hasn't grown in
Mhm.
20 years. Have we looked at why? I mean, is it
Boy, that's
lack of space? I mean, 75% of the county is national forest, correct? So is it lack of development growth? Is it, no, I don't want additional people in my county. I mean, I live up in Echo Hills and I like it the way it is. I don't want a house every half acre. I want my full acre or two.
That is it. There's a lot of reasons why.
Okay.
One is the geographics is the main reason, right? You have 70% federal land, right? You have an additional 5% on top of that. That's the state, Denver, right?
Oh, okay.
People who own other public land, so open space, right? You also have a real grade problem, right? 40% grade is a huge part of this county, right? If you go to Summit or Eagle County, they have those big valleys, right? We don't have that. Our big valley is the 70 corridor. and that's it. And it's not very wide. And it's definitely not those big bowls. So we don't have a lot of space to grow. So 11% of our land is developable. Of the entire county, only 11% can be economically built on, right? There are exceptions. There are some businesses that probably could operate on this the extreme grades, but they're largely recreation, right? Housing is very difficult for over 40% grade.
I want to
Can
say too, look around the room. Look at the ages of the people in the room, and that kind of shows your demographics too of the people that are living here. They're aging, and it's like the younger population too, my younger kids, are looking at not having children too. So I think things are changing too. So
Is it a good point, or is it a good, or is it a bad? Is it an issue for the county, or is that?
it is an
It's a
issue.
pertinent point.
Yeah, it's,
Some people just don't want the county to grow, right?
there is a lot of people.
But is that still an issue?
Yes, they do like it the way that it is.
Yeah.
That's where we run into the services. I mean, our fire department, you don't want 60 and 70-year-olds on your fire department. So you need the young families, but since we're kind of transitioning into an aging population, then yeah.
To come up with solutions that don't involve growth.
I want to add some other factors to this question. Why hasn't the county grown? You asked it. It's true. People haven't supported new housing in this county. They've elected people that don't support new housing. A lot of proposals for new housing have been turned down by the various local governments around, and some proposals have been approved more recently. But historically, we haven't seen a lot of that. At the same time, because our local governments haven't really focused on housing historically, we're finally starting to get there. We've watched our housing stock decay, right? So for you see a lot of new construction, but you see a lot of mobile home parks that used to have 30 active units now have 20 that are actually livable. It takes effort to get housing, especially the housing that you want at the price that you want. It takes focus and effort and investment from your local governments, especially when you're a EPA Superfund study area, and we are. And I think that's been a big disincentive. So we haven't exactly had developers knocking on our door, and we haven't exactly been out there with our fishing poles. So,
and then there's a little bit of a net to that too, right? We have added housing stock over that 20 years, but family sizes continue to shrink. So it offsets the growth, right? People used to have 2 kids, now they have 1, right? Or they don't have any, right? Or they age and their kids move out, and then the 2 new people that move in just break you even, right? So there's a lot of things that go into why populations flatline, but that in relation to our drop in assessed value and the explosion of the population of all of our neighbors all kind of creates a little bit of the situation that we're in right now. The last thing we're going to look at is more economic development. So this is around having a real vision for what the future looks like, right? Traditionally, to have a more diverse economy so because of our geographic restrictions, every square foot of this county needs to be working pretty hard, right, to pay the bills, okay? And so we have to not be reliant on a single large employer. We have to think about how do we build a more resilient and long-term economy, and what can we do with either public or private partnerships to try to sustain and build some kind of diversity into our economy. Next slide. Okay.
I'm sorry, can we go 2 slides back?
Yeah.
Yeah, this one. So what actually caused, like, the major thing that caused the reduction of the revenue for the county?
So
take that one.
go ahead.
In 2015, we learned from the Henderson mine, and you can look at the news articles that are out there, that they were going to reduce production.
Right.
A lot, the way that we get revenue, thank you for not interrupting. The way that we get revenue from the mine is based on how much they produce. And the production from the mine is a lot less. Now they are stable, they are open, and they're going to continue to be open. And this is the reality of what the reduction in production has done to the county's budget, the fire authority's budget, the library district's budget, the school district's budget, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Except the mine situation, so the mine, all the mine. Are there any other factors? Contributing?
Just mine.
Just.
I would say actually the revenues have actually went up in the other fields for tourism and stuff. So
That's-
we're trying to make this balance of, we don't want to rely on the mind to pay for our fire authority anymore. We need to pay those bills either by the people, well, both by the people that live here and by collecting some kind of retail taxes. And, we've talked about an excise tax that we would love to get so we can target the tourism industry. Right now, we cannot tax services. That is something that, that's going to be really big for us to try to get something going for next year for Clear Creek County. Because if we could get that and then the residents pay their bills, I don't know if people realize, but our taxes are pretty low here. When you look at other areas, you look at Texas or even Weld County. I looked at my brother's property out there. He lives on a dirt road.
Or Jefferson County or Summit County.
Yeah, so when we say I don't like paying my property taxes either. They went from $900 to almost $3,000 and my services, but the cost of things are so much more. So we're trying to not rely on the mine, I guess is what this is we're trying to come up with something. Probably we're not going to get $15 million because that was a lot of money, an excessive amount of money, but
And this is, though, I really want to emphasize, this is in spite of what we've seen in the assessed value growth of your homes and the tax bill growth. This is in spite of what you've seen about sales tax growth. Sales tax has grown a lot. This is all those factors are in here. So, and what economists will tell you when you've got a large mine in your county is that you need to focus on the sustainability of your services and think about how you're investing in those revenues. And that's the conversation we're trying to have right now.
she had a question back there.
Oh, yes.
If Henderson was taxed on their production, is Fry Pit and Young Pit taxed on their production, or is it different? Because I mean, they've taken out entire mountains over there.
It's the difference is one of scale. It's just one of sheer scale. The Henderson mine is a huge mine compared to the quarry, or it was.
Is the,
We have Lalitha here.
Yeah, I'm with the Henderson mine. I was also kind of curious about this conversation. So back in the day, Henderson used to produce 40 million pounds of molybdenum a year.
Mhm.
That was when we were at 600 employees, 3 crews. It was a full thing. Then in 2020 or in 2015, we were told, hey, economy's bad, price of molly's dropped. We got to figure something out. And Henderson was told they have to shut down. And I think you guys, if you were living here, you probably were part of those conversations. And it was a really terrifying moment because it was a short turnaround. And then luckily Henderson didn't shut down, but we definitely changed how we do our business now.
Mhm.
And so we now have about 400. We just got up above 400. It has been several years, probably pre-COVID numbers. But we are basically now steady at 10 to 12 million pounds a year. And that's kind of what we're sharing. Like that is our goal. Our goal is to maintain 10 to 12 million pounds a year and keep our headcount around that 400, 425 and be a steady mine as Clear Creek is working through this change. And our taxes are interesting because they're really complicated, but it's a 10-year average. There's all kinds of inputs on how you see it. And so that's why you don't see that impact in 2015, even though it happened in 2015. You're now feeling it now because we're kind of in that post 10-year average. And so you'll see hopefully as the years progress that we will kind of stay in that steady range, at least for Henderson. And so that therefore the county's working on figuring out how to adjust with that as they're working through their plans for resiliency going forward.
And another component of that too, when you're talking about the quarry versus the mine, one is quantity. It's the biggest portion. The other one is it's on revenue. Molly's worth more than rockets, right? And that's what they're producing in the quarry. So even if you had equivalent quantities, it wouldn't be worth nearly as much, right?
Great point.
So.
they are still in the top 10 for our revenue
Yes.
businesses though.
Yes,
The quarry.
Yeah.
yes.
And Young will help. It won't help my heart, right?
Right.
It'll help us have services. The Young quarry that was approved, Central City annexed a big portion of Clear Creek County, and there's going to be a big quarry up by the
Central City
Central City Parkway. Thank you.
Off the park.
Sorry, like elbow you.
Sorry.
Okay, so now we're gonna talk about kind of the process, right? Normally, when you handle some kind of deficit, whether it's an company or government, the first thing that happens is you enact spending controls, right? You realize you don't have enough money to pay your bills, so you start cutting costs immediately, right? You also reduce your base service in the states and governments, right? Once that happens, the next step is to assess your gap. Really understand, what do my long-term revenues look like? Where are my services now, right? What's my real structural problem, right? And that's honestly one of the most important steps, because you're trying to define the problem. And we'll get to that here. The next step is you want to update your forecast. You want to look at over the next 5 years, what do I know is coming, right? So I don't overshoot my target, right? If I have some revenue coming in or something else that might change, it changes what the goal is, right? So we'll talk about that a little bit. And then the last step is you still haven't closed it, right? You either look at service cuts, and pretty dramatic ones in our case, or voter approved revenue, right? Which is taxes, which is pretty the only tools that we really have, right? So
Right, and also mention that counties aren't allowed to deficit spend, unlike the federal government.
yeah. So we so that's what we'll talk about in this presentation. We'll walk through each one of these steps, okay? Next slide. Okay, so we'll talk about cost controls. This is what's happened over the last 10 years. Almost 35 FTEs have been reduced, right? That's a $2.8 million savings generally. We rebid our stop loss service, which what that is we're self-insured for health insurance, but if someone exceeds our self-insured amount, that insurance policy kicks in to cover those additional expenses, all right? So we rebid that. That was a saving of $500,000. We moved county dispatch to JeffCom, which is a consolidated dispatch center in Jefferson County that handles their municipalities and their county. Our municipalities and our fire service, our EMS service, and our sheriff are now dispatched to there. That was a $350,000 savings. So we've saved $3.65 million, right, through cost service cuts alone, okay? So now we're going to talk about the structural shortfall, okay? So where are we seeing the need? The primary need, number one, we have immediate needs. These are things that are going to affect us within 1 to 3 years, right? The next section is near-term needs. Near terms is more of like a 3 to 5 to 7 year horizon. So we're going to take the total of those and treat that as our structural shortfall. We'll walk through this one by one here. The biggest one is the general fund deficit. So back when the county had a lot of revenue coming in, they saved some money, right? So we have something called the general fund balance, which is essentially a bank account with cash in it, right? We deficit spend and have been deficit spending into that account since 2016, okay? Right now, the last year's draw out of that bank account was 1.35 million, right? So that's the most critical issue, right? Is because eventually the bank account hits zero and then that's a cut immediately, right? Outside of that, we also are not competitive in our workforce compensation, right? Last year, our peak turnover rate hit 42%. That means 42% of our staff turned over in 1 year, right? There's a lot of reasons for this, but in our data, the primary reason is we're not compensating people enough, right? A lot of them, the vast majority of our workforce live down the hill. They pass 5 jurisdictions on the way to work that do the same job for more money, right? So it's very difficult to keep people here when we don't pay people enough, right? So that's the next critical. That kind of turnover rate is incredibly disruptive to services and very expensive, right? Because on cases like the sheriff's office, if they're down deputies, that's mandatory overtime because they have to still provide service, which means they're paying more for that next hour than they would if they had that person staffed, right? The third one is our third EMS ambulance crew. Our calls for service for EMS have gone up every year for the last 10 years, right? To the point where we're running 800 calls a year for a single ambulance, where all of our peer counties, all of our rural peer counties that have long run times are running 400 to 500. So we're 1 every 3 days, Gilpin is standing by as our ambulance service, right?
So why has it gone up so much?
There's a lot of reasons for that. One is the increased visitation. We're 21% up over 5 years, right? It's the increased traffic on 70, right? It's also quite frankly, our aging demographics, right? We are the third oldest county in the state. And so as that keeps happening, so all of those reasons factor in, right? So this is a really critical need for us because we're, one, burning our EMS crews out, and two, Gilpin is now our backup ambulance service 1 out of 3 days, which means those transport times are really long.
I also just as a healthcare advocate, I don't know if you've noticed, but your healthcare systems aren't working for you. And when they don't, and you're not showing up to primary care, and then you end up calling EMS more, right? And so as our healthcare systems fail, our emergency medical systems become more important.
So what percentage would you say, maybe somebody can say, of this third ambulance is due to I-70?
I-70 is difficult to say, but we're about 50-50 between residents.
You know,
But I will say that the non-resident number is growing faster. That's unfortunate.
I couldn't hear that. I'm sorry, you said.
It's about 50-50 right now.
Right, and comment you made after that. Sorry.
About 50-50 is split between the residents and non-residents right now, but
So not necessarily
the
I-70.
non-resident portion is growing faster as a proportion of our calls. It goes up every year, right?
They also, the billing thing, right? Like how much we get when we bill insurance.
Step a little bit.
Sorry. Right. We bill insurance, when we bill Medicaid, right? Because we bill for those services, right? We're not just providing that service for free. But the billing, right, is more of a challenge, right? The provider rate, Medicaid provider rate has not kept up. And so there's a lot of factors here.
Yeah, so we struggle with revenue recovery. We only get about 30% costs recovered through billing.
Is there a factor to calling an ambulance here more often instead of like, okay, so let me just step back to say, I've definitely done the math of if something happened to my son where he needs to go to the hospital, calling an ambulance immediately, even if it's something where normally if I live somewhere else, I might be able to drive him to a hospital. Because here it is hell to go to a hospital, right? We don't have anything close by. So as part of it too, that it's just like, well, it's gonna take forever, so I want him to have a doctor immediately.
And I think that's
We don't have that level of healthcare remotely close to us.
I think that's a reasonable position for people to take. The other thing is that our run times are really long.
Yes.
Our ambulances are out of service for a long time because they have to take people all the way to St. Anthony's, back up the hill. They're not back in service till they're back in the county.
Right.
The vast majority of that run time is not in our county, right? And this is why we compare ourselves to our peer counties that also are in the same situation and not Denver Health, who might be back in service within 5 minutes, right? Because the hospital is so close. Near, any more questions on that?
I have a question. Do you think if we would have urgent care here in the county, that would solve the situation so the ambulance would not have to drive all the way down to the.
I think it would alleviate some of the calls, but the non-resident calls, it's hard to say, right? If people are responding to accidents or they fall off a mountain or they hit a tree in Loveland, they're going to the hospital, right? Urgent care is not where they're going. So it depends on what the severity of the call is.
And just to kind of piggyback on that, though, Golden has that nice combination of urgent and like partial emergent care, where it's not a full emergency. It's not like Denver Health, but it is still partial emergent care. I mean, is that something we've ever explored too, where it's like, okay, it'll get us, some broken limbs or something?
I remember this because we discussed this when we were building this place. Our EMS team at the time told us that an urgent care would not divert very many of their calls for the reason that Colton just said. They're really responding to urgencies. You show up to urgent care because you're sick and you don't want to wait for an appointment, or you broke your arm and you can't wait for the appointment. But you're also not getting in an ambulance very often to head to urgent care. So, and they just, yeah. So I can't remember the numbers, but I won't repeat myself.
so what percentage of the out of county calls is reimbursed to the county?
Only about 30%.
Only about 30%.
And that has to do with the way insurances can pay for ambulance whatever they want. They can give us everything we ask for. They can give us $1.
But then you must bill the people that were
right?
involved.
And they might not have the money to pay. A lot of times they don't, and it goes to collection, right? And we set our reimbursement rates at what the feds tell us to charge, right? And even that doesn't cover our complete costs, even if we could get people to pay them, right? So.
And it just, at the end of the day, while we're on EMS, I mean, that's a team that's going to show up to save your life. And it matters. It matters to have them. Like, there's a lot of reasons, factors about why, and I'm one voter that is ready to vote to make sure that when someone needs their life saved, they're going to show up. And this team is great at it. Their save rate a couple of years ago was 50% on cardiacs. The national average is 7%. So
They also carry whole blood in the ambulance, right? They're all critically care endorsed paramedics, which is very, very, very rare. And for a paramedic system, the reason that we do that is because of these long drive times and the fact that we are dealing with a lot of times very severe injuries, right? Because it's trauma, right? It's because it's bad car accidents, bad ski accidents, climbing accidents, right?
Mountain biking.
Accidents, right? So we need to have really top-notch paramedics, right? Because they're running a long time, right? Next one, near-term needs. Okay, sorry. Next section. The near-term needs, these are more middle term. I said 3 to 7 years, right? Our grant-supported programs are now pretty, with all the changes to the federal government, we don't know what we're getting for grants now. We have about $3 million worth of programs that are funded by the federal government, right? CCHAT, Public Health, Human Services, Mountain Youth Network, and a lot of our capital, right? A lot of our capital, so our investments in buildings and roads and things like that are done through grants that are usually passed through some federal government. The shooting range was funded by a federal grant, right? So all of those are now unknown, right? Which is why it's in the midterm, but it is definitely a risk that is now stretched, addressing our structural problem, right? The other issue that we have is, despite all the federal grants that we do get for capital, the first thing that people cut when they start having money issues, whether it's you or a company, is capital, right? This means not replacing vehicles, you replace if you go an extra year, right? Not doing maintenance on buildings when you don't have the money to do them, because it's an easy thing to cut that can wait. We've been doing that for 10 years now, right? So now we're reaching the point where our maintenance costs and our repairs costs, because we're operating deficient equipment, is getting extremely high. We spent over $100,000 on motors alone for the sheriff's department last year, right? So in order for us to normalize and catch up, we're about $750,000 in the hole on those investments. That includes road and bridge, graders, machines, all that stuff, buildings, HVAC systems. All of that is now way past its service life and is starting to really hinder our ability to, one, operate, but financially it's becoming more expensive to operate the old equipment than it would be to buy new ones if we had the money, right? So that total is the structural shortfall of about $7 million, okay? Any questions on this slide? Okay. So next step, like we talked about before, quantify your near-term opportunities, right? So property tax growth. This is strictly restricted. This number is only about new construction, okay? So Bighorn Crossing, the apartments on the football field at 4 points. Why can't I ever remember?
Field house is what I see.
Field house.
Yeah.
it's because they keep rebranding it.
Those are the 2 largest housing projects ever in this county. And the Argo will net us about $185,000, right? That's it, okay? We can also revisit our jail operation. This is a little bit different than the assessment because we have multiple options here. We have what the assessment thinks we may or may not be able to save by changing that operation holistically, but we do have the potential, if we don't change the operation, to bring in more federal inmates, right? What that is the federal government will pay our jail to hold U.S. Marshal inmates, right? And the sheriff thinks that if we can maximize our ability to hold as many as we can, we're looking at about $500,000 there, right? So that's the minimum of what we think we can generate, right? There might be more savings with changing the way the jail operates, but we don't know yet, but that's the minimum number. Tolling, parking, and enforcement. So this means charging parking at some of our open spaces for non-residents only, right? Also increased tolling potentially on Guanella Pass, right, for non-residents. and because that's the county road, and more photo enforcement for speeding by the sheriff's office. We think if we can do all three of those things, that 885,000 is a reasonable amount of revenue for that, right? We also have a debt service on this building, right? The first 5 years of this building's bond was paid by donations and outside sources. The next 5 years are going to hit the general fund at $640,000 a year. That will come off in 2030, and the building will be paid for.
Can we just, since they're in the room, thank Henderson Mine for
Yes.
being the largest donor to that project? Yeah, I mean, yeah, you're the Henderson Mine.
Okay, so let's get back to the summary, right? So this is now the pyramid. We started with a structural deficit. We talked about at 7 million. We have these near-term opportunities of about 2.2 million. That leaves us a $4.8 million gap, right? So that's really the problem we're going to try to solve in the rest of the presentation to get to a sustainable revenue model, okay? Next slide. Okay, so we're going to talk about tax for the increased assessments, okay? Because this got really complicated this last year. And since this is a conversation about revenue, this is a good place to have it, okay? So whose reassessment went up more than 10%? Right? Okay, that's a huge shock, right? Last year, the state held a special session that tried to address this issue. There's two things that came out of that. One, there is now a reduction in the assessment rates. So the way that property tax works is that the taxable value of a property is only a percentage of its value, okay? So if they lower that rate, that means that we're taxing less. So with our new assessment rates for non-school, because school got a different assessment rate, $180 million is the assessed value in 2005 for residential across the whole county. Can anyone guess what the market value of that is? It's $3 billion, right? So $3 billion worth of homes, we can tax $180 million worth of $3 billion, okay? And that's because of the change in the assessment rate. So when you look at the assessment rate here, I'll get behind you. Here's the point, right? It went from 0.7, 6.7 in 2004 to 6.15, right? That's a 10% reduction in that assessment percentage of your house, okay? Commercial also went down 3%. Ag went up 2%, which doesn't really affect us. Vacant land went down, which is a huge deal for us. And so did natural resources, right? So when those values went up, your tax bill will not proportionally increase because those assessment rates went down, right? So when you got that scary increase, and it is, right, it's not a 40% increase in your tax rate because the assessment rate went down. The net change for us as a county, because of the drop in commercial, vacant land, and natural resources, we're up 8% in our tax revenue based on property taxes. Based on some people getting 40% increases in their residential, the reduction in the other assessment rates wiped a lot of that out, right? So we're looking, best case scenario, at maybe another $1 million in tax revenue, right? We don't know yet because we haven't gone through protests, right, which will bring the number down. There's also a complicating factor in the way that we have to cap the growth of revenue, which is also in the bill, right? The bill says that if the state grows more than 5% in assessed value, then the tax revenue increase can only be 5.25% per year over 2 years, right? So a total of 10.5%, right? So if that's the case, and we have to reduce our collections, your tax bill will be capped at the maximum amount of growth under that bill. It's a lot.
I want to make sure people aren't hearing that your tax bill will never increase more than 10.5%.
It is over 2 years.
Our revenues can't increase more than 10.5% over 2 years. But the breakdown between commercial and residential and stuff makes it too complicated for you to know or say to know, like, I've got a 10.5% cap on my growth. Does that make sense? Like if commercial also grew, right? Like I just want to make sure you don't walk away from this being like the county promised my tax bill wouldn't go up by more than 10%. Because we don't know right now.
There's tentative and tentative and tentative because this bill is very new and no one's done this before. So all the assessors are running around like crazy trying to figure out exactly how to bill this out because of all of these conditions that are now in the bill. The big one, the big complicating one is the schools and the non-school is now assessed at different rates, right? The other issue here is that it's more of a, even though commercial is assessed at 27%, look at our commercial evaluation compared to our residential. We don't have a lot of commercial, we don't have a lot of industrial, right? This is a county that's value in properties, primarily people's homes, which are assessed at a much lower rate, right? So that's part of the reason why the offset for us was pretty extreme. Any?
I have a question.
Yep.
So just to clarify, that's first time somebody explained it to me. My property assessment, like value, was raised 69% this year. 69. And it's not lower than the market value. It's equals to the market value of my property right now. And what is that 6.15%? Is that from the market value or what is
That is of the market value, right? So we can only tax 6.1. So first of all, you take your exemptions off, right? If you have exemptions, senior exemption or other kind of exemptions, it will lower that market value. And then the percentage is attached to that, right? So they can only tax 6.5% of that value, right? So if it goes up 40%, right? Since the assessment rate dropped 10, you're netting out not 40, right? It just depends on what your exemptions are too, right?
I don't have any exemptions.
Well, then it would probably be pretty linear, right? It would be minus, I mean, you can figure it out for yourself, probably what to expect. But again, these are tentative, right? We don't know exactly what we're gonna have to cap the revenue growth at yet.
Yeah, but the assessment value, assessed value of the property was usually lower than the market value, and now it's equal.
Well, you shouldn't have got your assessed values yet. That mailer that went out is the market value.
Okay.
It's the market value, not the assessed value. The assessed value will come later because we don't even know which number to use yet. So that number hasn't been come out yet because we haven't heard from the state.
Okay.
So that's the market value that you got on that mailer.
That's percentage from the market value.
Yes, yes.
Colton, did you want to talk about too why Clear Creek went up so much this time because we're so behind?
So we're a little bit behind, right? We're on the end of the bubble. These kind of huge 40, 60, 70% increases happened in Denver 4 years ago. They happened in Jeffco 2 years ago, and they're getting here now, right? Because it kind of just rippled out, right? Things got unaffordable or more expensive. People moved a little bit farther out and they moved a little bit farther out, right? So we're catching up to a lot of what's changed already in the other parts of the metro, right? We're just kind of like last of the party in a little bit of a sense. So this is really about, because we only reassess every 2 years, right? So if there's a lot of market transactions within the 2 years between that are seeing a huge amount of growth, that's when that next year, right? So really you're 3 years behind, okay? So because of the lag on us, the state has been in Jeffco and Denver and a lot of places in the metro have been dealing with these kind of increases in their values for 10 years, right? And they finally got to us on the scale that we saw this last year. Any other questions?
Would you please clarify what is the personal property?
So there's certain kind of big equipment, right? For example, right, Loveland Ski Resort, for lack of a better example, those lifts are a part of that personal property, right? If you have huge capital intensive personal property, right, that's sales tax, that's property tax,
Okay.
right?
Okay.
But it's not. And then most residential will have a little bit of that number too, for the value of your, basically the building and not the land, right?
Okay.
So, but it's classified a little different with residential. That number is primarily driven by commercial operations.
Yes, understandable.
Yeah.
And natural resources, what is it?
So that is basically land that doesn't have any development on it, right? That has some kind of natural resources value, right? So this is
land that cannot be developed.
That cannot be developed.
If you go to the assessor's office and you say, hey, look at this parcel I own, we're going to convince you that we cannot get a road in here, then we put it into natural resources.
Right. Where if you have a vacant parcel that can be developed,
Okay.
that's vacant land, right? That means there's a potential for development. Those natural resources parcels are very, very low revenue.
Is
Talking like
somebody
$200.
own this resource?
Yes, they're privately owned. They're not federal. They're not publicly
Okay.
owned. They're all
They're still
privately
paying
owned.
taxes for that, so that's
Yes,
how, okay.
yes, they are still paying taxes. They just pay a very small amount because it's not developable. The value land is actually pretty low, but it's a huge part of our county, right? We have a lot of this kind of land, right? So that number is pretty low from a revenue perspective, but as a portion of our available land, it's actually a lot of acres, right? They're just those steep grades, you know, that you can't do anything with.
Nancy.
I guess I'm confused. Yeah, I had taxes that went up 50-60%. How does that, property taxes, how does that fit into this 5.2% per year? That overall, the county can only increase 10% over 2 years. I mean, a lot of people's taxes went up that much.
Your estimated value went up. Your taxes haven't gone up, and the assessor's office is going to send you another piece of mail later in the year saying, this is how much your taxes are going up.
I'm sure they said how much our taxes were going to be.
They can't have, not for this
No,
year, and they might have previously.
Values.
Yeah.
So what we're used to in Colorado is you see your property is worth 10% more, and you know your property tax bill is going to be 10% more. That's what we're used to. Because of all these changes, that's not a 1-to-1 ratio anymore. So your taxes are going to go, the high level message is your taxes are going to go up by a lot less than your assessed value just did.
Thank you.
Yeah. But we don't have, at this point, because we don't have direction from the state and the Assessors Association, can't provide those numbers exactly today. But over the next month, you'll start getting those mailers come out once the state makes the decision.
Thank you for clarifying that.
Thanks, George. Okay, so next we're going to talk about simulating revenue options, right? So you're the voter, you can decide whether or not to increase taxes or not, right? But what I'm trying to do with these next 4 slides is explain how taxes affect people's budgets, right? Their household spending. That's the most important thing, is how does this affect you, right? So what we're going to go through here is talk about how different taxes affect different people differently, right? And so the first thing we're going to talk about is this is a median house in this county, right? This is a median family, right? That has a mortgage, okay? The most variable percentage in here of what your budget goes to, after taxes, after housing, right, costs. Well, this includes housing costs. It's primarily after taxes and savings, depending on if you do it or not, is your housing costs, right? Some people spend 50% of their income on their housing. Other people might spend less than 5%, right? Because they own their home. So that number averages out across the population of the state to be about 31%. And this is not you. This is just an example to help you think about how household budget works. The next biggest portion, and oftentimes more expensive than what people spend on housing, is sales taxable expenses, right? And these are everything that you buy that can be sales taxed, right? Generally speaking, not everyone, people spend more money out of their budget every year on those items than they do on the house. Okay, go ahead.
When you said that this budget is based on a median household in the county, what's like that income that we're talking
It's about 90,000.
And like
household of 2.3 people, and a median house value now is 520, around 500.
okay, and just to understand, this is a median household for the county, but we're using mean spending.
No, this is all median, right? 31% is in line with the rest of the state, is what I was trying to say. I'm sorry if I misspoke. That's true here, and it's true for the rest of the state, right? It's around 30, right? But again, that number is the most volatile number in here, because there are people who are younger who might have bought high interest rate houses, right? That are really expensive, that are spending 40, 50%, right? We'll talk about that a little bit later. And then there are people who have their houses paid for that are essentially only paying property tax, right? So that number moves a lot. These other, and it affects how much you spend on everything else, right? If you spend 50% of your income on your home, then you spend less on sales taxable items because you don't have the money, right? Does that make sense? Okay, then there's another portion of here that's itemized out, which is groceries, right? Groceries are about 11% of a household budget on average, right? The more money you make, the less percentage this is, because there's kind of like a limit of how much people can physically spend on groceries, right? If you are more lower income, this is a higher percentage of your income, right? So this number moves a little bit too. The savings rate also changes a lot, right? The more money you have, the more you save. That saved money is not taxable, it just kind of disappears out of the economy until it's spent, right? Wealthier people save a much higher portion of their income because they can. Poorer people don't oftentimes save any, right? And then the other expenses are non-sales taxable expenses, right? These are primarily services. The biggest meat here is healthcare, right? But there's some other things in here. The important thing, the reason groceries are separated out here in this, it's because in this county, groceries are taxed for sales tax. That is not true for most of our neighbors. Jeffco does not put sales tax on groceries, right? They don't put sales tax on electricity. We have no exemptions here, right? So these sales tax increases affect a much bigger portion of this pie than they would if you lived somewhere else, okay?
Gloria, say it.
I was just gonna ask you, how recent is this data?
This is 2022. This is the most recent data it's from the Consumer Expenditure Survey, which is a federal survey that goes out that looks at how much people spend on things.
I'm gonna suggest a lot of that changes big time soon. Especially the healthcare.
Yes. And again, that's another very volatile number, right?
Yeah.
Younger people, if that's the biggest proportion of that, don't spend a ton on healthcare. People, that's all of these numbers move a lot, right? People. So that's why this is just an example, right? This is just to help you kind of think about your own situation and benchline it against here. Some people do spend more on things than this, right? And we're talking in generalities generally, but so this is really just a thought exercise. This isn't telling you exactly how much you might pay, right? Next slide. Okay, so we're going to talk about three options here. One is a public safety sales tax, 2%, that taxes all county sales, but exempts food from the remaining stack. And what that means is the state won't allow us to exempt just this 2% from food, but keep the food tax on the existing 2.65% sales tax, which exists from the county now. It is all or nothing, right? So if we exempt food on any increase of taxes, it affects the entire stack. Does that make sense? It affects all the existing sales taxes in place, right? The next option is public safety tax that doesn't exempt anything, right? This is traditionally how sales tax has gone in this county. Hybrid is a 1% increase in sales tax and a 7 mil increase to the general fund. This is done to just show you how property taxes affect people's budgets, right, differently, right? And what that net would be, okay? Just to remind everyone that this is towards the $4.8 million existing structural shortfall, okay? Any questions on this so far?
So that 2% increase, right?
Yes.
So the total would be,
Right now, we have 2.65, a 2% increase would be 4.65%, right?
Okay.
Any questions? Okay.
Question, you said on the first one, if you have food exemption, you basically have to remove the existing,
Yes.
so there's no tax on food.
There will be no tax on food from the existing stack.
If you do that.
Yeah.
And number two, no exemptions.
No exemptions, right? Yes. And it'll be a little bit easier to understand that dynamic on the next slide. Next one. Okay, so we're talking about exempting food. So we have 6 demographics here. Family of 4, the median house at median income, okay? This is a $500,000 house, $90,000 income, right? An elderly single person on fixed income, about $40,000 a year, has a single exemption and their home is paid for, a senior exemption on their property tax. Wealthy couple, this is 100% median over median, which means a $250,000 home, or $1 million home, $1 million home and a $250,000 annual income. 2 people in that family. We have a single low renter, doesn't own their home. Low income, right? And then we have a single parent with 2 kids. This is our house 4 person. This is a person who spends over 40% of their income on their home, okay? So the first column, that's what their annual sales tax increase would be on a 2%. This is the amount of money that they would pay in addition to what they already pay in taxes on a 2% increase, right? This assumes 2 things. 1, they do all of their grocery shopping in the county. Now, this is largely not true, right? But I will say it is a binary thing. It is all or nothing generally with people. grocery shopping is very habitual. There's a reason that every single grocery store you look at puts stuff in different places because it's called a switching cost, which means they want to confuse you into never leaving, right? Because you'll add 20 minutes onto your figuring out where everything is time, right? This is a real, because grocery shopping is a habitual thing. People go to the same grocery store, same time, every week, right? So it's either you do your shopping here or you don't, right? And so it's 100% or zero. If you don't do your shopping here, you can take your annual food savings off, right? You don't pay that anyway, okay? The other assumption here is that only 50% of your sales taxable transactions happen within the county, right? Because there are things you can't buy here, right? As Rebecca's mom says, there's nowhere to buy underwear, right? You can't buy tires, you can't buy a toilet, right? So are there certain things that we know people are going probably to Jeffco to get?
Plus, there's things that you go elsewhere to get, but you're still gonna get charged the sales tax. You buy a car.
Cars.
Have a washing machine and dryer delivered, you're gonna pay the sales tax.
And delivery goes to any online ordering. If you buy on Amazon,
It
you pay
does.
county taxes.
Absolutely.
Yep.
And city.
And city, yeah.
Do we have a sense of these, like, more concrete sense of these demographics in the county? So I know that we were kind of doing a thought experiment, but do we have more like harder numbers of
How many?
elderly singles, how many low income renters, like what's the percentage?
Not off the top of my head, our low income renters are on this group are probably our lowest. But no, I couldn't tell you off the top of my head. This is really more about just like pick the one that you feel closest to see what. But as far as a percentage of the breakdown of these within the county, I would have to look at that.
Well, and that's fine. I mean, aside, I don't expect you to be able to look it up on the spot, but more like we have access to that information
Yes.
for decision making.
Yes, yeah, we do.
I would probably argue that there's a slight degree of response bias of people who are able to attend town halls is not always going to
Yeah, absolutely.
low income families because they have other things to do with their lives.
Absolutely. I'm just trying to provide like a generalized sweep of the demographics that we see. This is not proportional, nor is it ranked in an order of how many people are who, right? So annual sales tax increase, the savings you would get from exempting food if you shop for groceries in the county is the next column, which is a negative number. Your net change is that last number, right? I'm not going to read all of these individually, but the single parent of two who is very house poor and doesn't have a lot of disposable income, right, benefits the most from this. Also, people with children spend more on groceries, right? So the combination of those two things creates a situation where that's the lowest impact for that person, right? The highest in all cases is going to be that wealthy couple, right? Because they have a lot of disposable income, they're buying a lot of stuff, right? Their house is worth a lot of money. This generates $3.7 million in revenue, but shows substantial savings across the board from that food exemption that offsets some of that additional sales tax cost, right? It's a moderate increase in taxes for all households, benefits primarily modest and lower income families, right? Because that grocery percentage of their income is the highest, okay? Next slide. This is the simplest, no exemptions, right? This is the first column of the other slide. Basically, this is taking what you spend on sales taxable items, doesn't exempt anything, right? So you're talking about the highest being $1,200 for that wealthy couple, the lowest being that single parent with two kids, right, at $300, right? So 2%, $5 million in revenue, right? This is the biggest financial impact, right? But it's also the most expensive for the residents. I want to talk about sales tax here a little quick, right? So there is a narrative that is true that 40% of our sales tax is paid by tourists. That is accurate as an aggregate. But what families pay who live here is considerably more on the individual basis. We get 7 million visitors a year. There's 9 million of us, 9,000 of us, sorry. So they might pay 10 cents, 12 cents, 50 cents, $2. A family that lives here will pay considerably more. The reason that it's 40% is only because of what's called a base rate, which is 7 million tourists making small transactions a lot of times versus people who live here who do a lot of their consumption within the county. Our sales tax in the unincorporated has grown every year. And the reason that is how much Amazon delivers here. right?
Our sales tax revenue.
Our sales tax revenue, right? Because of that online, these sales tax increases affect those people a lot, right? Because they do so much consumption online, because you can't get those things here, or you don't want to drive 30 minutes to Walmart, right? So that is a big part of why these numbers are pretty large, right? Next slide. Okay. So this is a balanced tax strategy. This is a 1% increase in sales tax, but it exempts food. Okay. So basically, the additional revenue that's changed, that's generated from that 1% is almost exclusively wiped out by the exemption, right? For a lot of people. Some people's sales tax payment will drop, right? They will pay less in sales tax. And those are the people that spend a lot of their money on groceries, okay? So that's a negative $78 change in sales tax to the family of four, a $9 change with a single family with two kids, right? $1 increase in sales tax liability for the single renter the low income renter and the elderly person, the single elderly person, because of exempting the food out of the stack, right? They will pay more for those sales taxable, traditional, durable good items, but they will pay less for their groceries. So the net will be, in some cases, a very small increase or a savings, right? The annual property tax increases because of that assessed value reduction, right? And the assessment rate, that's 6% to 6.15%. Also because that exemption, that percentage is so low, property taxes are relatively cheap compared to sales tax for homeowners. That is not the case for commercial businesses, right? Because their assessment rate is a lot higher. But so what you get is the lowest increase across the board with a balanced option and people's total tax liability, right? Now, the only reason the reason we're showing this is because there is a very visceral reaction to property tax. And understandably, I don't like paying mine either, right? But that number comes all at once. A sales tax kind of sneaks up on you, right? Because it's just a little every single time, right? And so part of the reason we're going through this is to show that for a lot of people, property tax is cheaper, right? The other reason property tax is cheaper is because sales tax can be bypassed, right? You could live here your entire life and never pay a dime in sales tax. You do all your shopping in Jeffco, right? Or you don't live here, right? Property tax casts a much wider net. If you just own a bunch of vacant property, you're not paying anything in sales tax, but you're paying property tax, right? We also have businesses here. About half of our total economic output of this county is not sales tax eligible, right? Recreational services, fuel are not sales taxed by the county, right? So those services, those customers don't pay, right? And that is set by the state. That is not a county decision. That is the rules that what is state tax eligible is set by the state, okay? So sales tax taxes all of those other entities, second homes, open space, recreational services, right? So it casts a much wider net on who it's grabbing the money from, right?
Wait, you say sales tax?
Sorry, property tax. Property tax sets a much.
Colton, isn't sales tax part of our utilities too?
Mhm. Electricity.
So you kind of
Gas.
cannot avoid it.
I mean, if you're off the grid, but yeah.
And we've got neighborhoods, York Gulch, 90 homes, 85 are off.
Yeah.
I think like a telling example here is Loveland Ski Area, right? Those tickets are not sales taxable. The way we get revenue from the visitors that go to Loveland Ski Area is their property taxes.
Rafting.
And the food and beer that they sell, but their vast majority of their revenue is not sales tax.
And that's a state thing, you said? And same thing with fuel?
Yep.
Rafting tickets.
I have a person online with a question.
Yep.
Stephen, you can go ahead. Oh, unmute.
Someone did, are we muted?
Can you hear us? He's muted. There we go. Go ahead with your question.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah.
I just had a question. I understand that the Loveland tickets and the tickets for the rafting are not sales taxable, but my understanding is that can be gotten around by instituting entry fees and costs on those tickets so that they're not technically a sales tax, but they do pay an entry fee to the county. Is that correct?
I want to take that one. This is George talking. Counties do not have the authority to impose those kinds of fees. There's one instance, which is when they're using county land to access the river, rafting companies, when they're using county land to access the river, we can charge a fee on that. But that's the only instance. And the fees that we collect there, which we quadrupled this year, are generating, I don't want to throw out a guess that's wrong, but I want to say it's less than $100,000.
And then the reason is fees have to be.
Brian, do you know that number?
Yeah.
It's much less than that.
And because it has to be directly tied to our costs, fees are about cost recovery, not about revenue generation, right?
And
So
also,
it's a limit on how much we can charge.
Loveland isn't on county land, it's on federal land.
Right. But it's a great question. And the conversation that Clear Creek County has been trying to have with the state is, should counties be able to bring voters better options? You all right now, Tabor proclaims to give you options. What it does also is give you a very small set of very bad options. And the state could decide that you could have better options, right? It could decide that the tax rate on rafting trips should be more than zero. And that's something that we've been working on. I've brought an idea like that to the state every year I've been in office. I'll do it every year I am in office, and these two will carry it on. In the meantime, I think focusing on the sustainability of our services matters enough that I think it's time to start talking about these other options.
Net here is the lowest amount, 3.2% or I'm sorry, I'm getting tired. 3.2 million, but it's also the cheapest, right, across the board for most demographics, right? So, next.
A question. So
Yeah.
what are those 7 additional meals to general fund, lady? Can you explain?
So right now, the general fund is 25.6 mils. A mill is basically for every $1,000 of assessed value, it's $1, right? They can get charged. So if it's 25 mils for every $1,000 of assessed value, it's $25, right? If we add 7, it would be 32, right? That's just a way to show how mills work. Mills work the same regardless of who collects them. Once the assessed value is set, say it's 60 grand, right? That means that you would just use that mill for every 1,000, right? And the sum of those mills is your total bill, right? So
That's going to affect our property taxes even more.
yes.
Okay.
So this is a property tax, right? General fund is not really critical here because all mills are paid the same way. It is more that it's just that's how this would work, right? On the average home, how much more you would pay.
And also, as of now, in Idaho Springs, we pay more than 10% of the sales tax, right? So increasing by 2%, let's say, that will be 12. That's even more, I assume, than down in Denver.
Yes, it's more. It would be the most than anywhere in the state.
How do you gonna keep up with the people
That's a
paying
good
here?
question. You don't want to be number one in that, right? And that's the problem. But it's boy.
It's hard because the municipalities keep raising their taxes. And now when the county needs to raise taxes, the municipalities are like, oh, no, you can't raise our taxes anymore. And we're like, well, we're only like 2.65% right now. So-
Sorry, because we can only propose, again, your options being very limited, we can only propose taxes countywide inclusive of the municipalities.
Right.
Right. So yeah, we don't have the ability to just raise the sales tax in the unincorporated, right? That's not an option. Right. Just like we can't issue an excise tax against recreational services, right? These are things that we would like to have because they allow for the potential of a more equitable taxation system, right? If you limit where the revenue can be collected, then all those other services and economic activities are largely not paying, right? And so the result of that is this very asymmetric, and we are a very asymmetric county, right? I don't think it's much of an issue in like Denver, where they have a bunch of people, a bunch of different businesses. But when you have such a huge portion of your economic activity that's exempt, it makes sales taxes really difficult, right? And because of that, people just raise the rate because they can't spread the net wider, right? If that makes sense, which is why property tax, because it sets a wider net, ends up being less burdensome on residents generally than sales taxes.
Idaho Springs municipality is 5%. Georgetown's is 4.5.
Yeah, plus state, plus county,
Plus
like all
county,
together.
yeah, so it's 10.8, I think, in Georgetown, I mean, Idaho Springs and Empire.
10.55.
State is 2.9.
2.95, yeah. So, okay. So if we don't do the revenue, right, there's another option, which is cutting services, right? So just to give you an idea of the scale of that kind of structural deficit, we're talking about wholesale elimination of a lot of things, right? Public safety would be reduced, patrol coverage from the sheriff, reduced, potentially reduced and extended response times for EMS. Community services, virtually non-existent code enforcement, elimination of the transit network, closure of the transfer station. Community development, we would have very little capacity for affordable housing, economic development, childcare, public health with reduction in clinic hours, elimination of the Mountain Youth Network, reduction in preventive health services. Administrative services would be greatly reduced in the processing time because primarily that's staff. Planning services, permits, licenses, vital records, all of that stuff, reduced operations of the courthouse beyond already what it is, right? Just to give you an idea, that kind of number is about a 60 FTE cut, right? We would be by far the lowest FTE count of any county in the state of Delaware. Go ahead.
There are counties with 900 people.
Yeah, but they have, yeah, there's a lot of intergovernment transfers there. We would be very, very, very low, right? So that's kind of the options at this point, right? I mean, to be frank, so and that's really what this is about. It's an open discussion, right? This is a taxpayer decision on what happens. And this has been trying to be as informational as possible and transparent as possible about where the money's going to fall and how it's going to work, right? Yeah.
Can we, I just, before we get to questions, and I think we should open it up to questions about anything, right? There's a lot of services that you depend on. Maybe there's things you're seeing, maybe there's, anyway. But you all responded. Thank you to those who did respond to, I see it in your binder right here. We've sent 2 surveys over the last 6 months talking about taxes. One was specific to the fire authority and one was specific to the sheriff and EMS because the county funds fire authority. Sorry, the county funds sheriff and EMS. Fire authority is funded by
The county.
a district that the county runs and that's unincorporated, and the municipalities. So we responded to those 2 surveys and you'll see the open questions in those surveys, you'll see answers to your questions be published. But the response, and we've been working with the municipalities to figure out what the right tax proposal is we're now considering a property tax increase in the unincorporated portion of the Clear Creek Fire Authority district. That's the option that we're considering today that may appear on your ballot. And so I want you all to know that because you might have questions about that survey.
Would you say that again?
Yes.
What you're considering?
A property tax increase to fund fire and EMS that would appear on the ballots of the unincorporated portion of the Clear Creek Fire Authority. The reason it's the unincorporated portion is for 2 reasons. The Board of County Commissioners, that's the district that we govern. And it's got a 4.5 something tax rate right now that hasn't changed since 1988. Because the municipalities have more flexibility, they can pay for it out of their general funds. They've already increased their contributions to 9 mils, to a 9 mil equivalent. And it's time for the county to catch up. And we're talking about having some funding for EMS in there as well. So that is the option that we're considering moving forward. And I just wanted to share that. We have the fire department in the room. They have as much of a sustainability problem as we do. So with that, let's get to questions. I saw Lori, I saw Nancy, and I'm sorry, I should know your name. Katie. I saw your hand first, Nancy.
So you're thinking of having possibly one of these options that you just addressed and went through the balance, the sales tax food exempt or, you know, one of these. Plus in unincorporated areas, property tax increase.
Not on the same, not this year.
I don't understand. I mean, you mentioned the property tax increase for the fire district in unincorporated Clear Creek County.
Yeah.
That you're thinking of having that on the ballot. Is that in addition to these or in place of these?
The sales tax increase.
So I want to say, as far as the board goes, I think we've identified what the crucial pieces are right now that we want to work on first. And that's to get our fire authority and EMS. Those are the services that we need at the minimum, and we need to get them. They have not asked for an increase since the 80s. So that is kind of our priority. That does not help our budget.
It doesn't help the county.
I get that. Okay.
So
we're.
But why did you talk about how much that was going to pay to the fire authority?
that will, I mean, this is the taxation in Colorado is complicated because there are a lot of governments, right, that try to serve you at the local level. The library district talked about a mill last year, the separate government, same problem. School district has asked for 2, right, in the last 5 or 6 years, different government. So the answer to your question is yes. Over time, we will need to talk about the tax rates that go to the fire department, and we'll need to talk about the tax rates that go to the county. You're not going to see both of those questions on the ballot at the same time.
We also.
When do you think the ones that are going to help the county budget will be on the ballot?
2, 3, 4 years.
Okay.
We also have to wait and see what's happening with these assessments, and some things have changed since we started doing this presentation back in April or May. Yeah. And we wanted to give everybody the same presentation. So that's why you're getting that. And then you guys are getting additional information that even at the DLD meeting, we didn't talk about the fire authority. So that's something that with all of the CCFA meetings that have been going on since last January 2024, or maybe before that.
Since last January,
They did an
35 elected
assessment, and
officials.
it's kind of like combining now, which is a priority, which do we need to go for first? And that's what's being decided.
Lori?
So this is kind of I have a question, but I guess a comment first. And the comment is sort of duh, but service cuts will impact residents. The burden of increased taxes impact residents. And there are over 50% of people receiving services going through our county that this really does not impact. I mean, they're getting great services that we're paying for. So that's kind of the duh.
I would argue that whether it's a property or a sales tax increase, visitors are going to help pay that bill.
Well, we've already heard from Colton, they pay less in sales tax than residents.
As an individual, right, they still pay 40% of the total take, right? So, and then that's just why, but if you have a business that's serving primarily tourists, they will pay through their revenue and their visitation of that business, that entire bill, right? Which is why property tax in a way is a little bit more equitable in that switch, right? Because in order for us to collect sales tax from those people, they have to, 1, buy something, and 2, buy something that's sales tax eligible, right? And they don't always, right? We are working a lot with the business community, as Jody mentioned earlier, to try to change that dynamic, to get people more into the towns to spend money, because they do carry a risk, whether they're on 70, whether they're hiking. I think we've had 3 rescues on Torrey already this year, right? And so like they do carry a risk to us if they're here, right? Our ability, because of the limitations that George has set out on our ability to issue directed taxes, is limited by the state, right? And so unfortunately, that means that there is some level of, yeah, they get great services and they don't pay anything, right? But we have control over doing a better job of getting them into the businesses, right? Getting them and not having them do something and drive home, right? Drive, do something, then go to Georgetown or Idaho Springs and spend some money and then go home, that helps a lot offset a lot more of that cost. And we leak. There's a term in economic forecasting called leakage, which means that a real potential opportunity to generate revenue or money and you're not getting it. It's leaking. We have a pretty high leakage rate right now with the day tripping people, right? Only about 60 to 65% of them, depending on where they are, will just go home. Or they won't spend money in the county, right? So we need to do a better job with that group of getting them to make transactions here, because they do go somewhere else, usually down the hill, and spend money. It's not like they're going straight home, right? We need to do a better job of connecting our open space with those people. And that should help increase that ratio, right, of how much they spend. But the important thing to remember is if you live here, you will always pay, because you do so much more of your spending here. If someone comes and they buy a pizza, there's only so much money you can generate off that person, right? Because they're not buying the bigger stuff here. They're not doing all of their shopping here, right?
But to your point,
Yeah,
there are more of them
There are
than
way more.
us. And so that's why we get more taxes from them, although individually they don't spend as much.
right.
Yeah, so I guess, I think that's a great strategy to try to get people to spend more here. My question really was, are there other counties who have this problem with a federal highway going through that costs so much to taxpayers in services? And what kinds of creative options are there? And why doesn't the Federal Highway Association, is this a Congress issue that we need our Congress people to charge, I don't know if it's gas tax or road tax or whatever, so that people are paying their fair share to get services on highways?
It's an important thing to continue to push on, and it's something that this board will continue to push on. A couple of things, that the shift in marketing strategy is happening. We're shifting into marketing strategy. For a long time, we focused on come to the backcountry and we're just going to hope that you show up in our towns. And now we have data that shows that that's not working. Now we're talking about, hey, you're in the woods, get into the towns and spend some money. And we're in Idaho Springs right now, and I live in Idaho Springs, and I know that the people who live in Idaho Springs might say, you're trying to get me, there's already a lot of traffic here, right? So like, it's hard everywhere. So I want to mention that. I want to mention that we receive more services than visitors do, right? When you're a family that's struggling, it's our Department of Human Services that shows up and helps out. We don't provide that service to visitors. We don't provide planning and building services to visitors, right? There's a lot out there that is for our people, our public health work. And so I want to make that point.
That point
And-
needs to be made in the marketing approach.
I agree. And in addition, I just want to share my perspective that talking about the sustainability of the services that Clear Creek County offers today is not talking about what I aspire to the people receiving from the county. I would argue to you that it's worth your dollars to get to sustainability, so that when we do have success at the state, we're talking about expanding housing and childcare services. We're talking about doing better everywhere. There's a lot of services. We're talking about wildfire mitigation. We're talking about recreation management. Not in that $4.5 million number is any of those things that people talk to me every day about wanting. So just want to share that as well. And then we'll get to, and I'm sorry, you said your name once.
Katie.
Katie, thank you.
I wanted to add too,
Oh, yeah.
you wanted an example. Eagle is an area that they have a lot of highway issues, Glenwood Springs. And how they can offset that is they get people into their towns that spend a lot of money. So they have a different, where we have failed to do that. We've got the towns, they also have more developable land. So they have a lot more businesses. We go to CCI in some of these places, Keystone, Vale, and they have big conferences. We don't have a place that can hold over, I think it's 88 people. So we can't even have big things that we can get a lot of taxes from. So I think that's kind of a pinch point that we have too. And some of that is because some people don't want development. And then some of it is we just don't have places to develop.
Right, like you look at Vail, compare Vail to Georgetown, right? Vail, they built condos all over those hillsides. Georgetown, we've strategically protected those areas. That's a historic landmark district, right? And people of Georgetown want to keep it that way. It doesn't mean we can't build anything anywhere, but we don't want to build everything everywhere, right? And this sustainability puzzle is three things, right? It's the tax rate, it's what you want to see built, and it's the kind of services you want, right? And right now, one or some combination of those three things has to give. Katie.
I've kind of forgotten, but I was a little confused with, because you said, I thought you said the county couldn't tax just unincorporated, but then you're talking that special districts can? Is that what you're differentiating? Because you were talking about the fire authority or the.
We can, yeah, no, you caught it right. The reason.
Can.
I wouldn't argue to you that it makes sense, but you are not confused about how you heard it. We cannot propose sales taxes in anything but the whole county. Property taxes, we can come up with these interesting districts, and we did this to fund the fire authority that is this district that is kind of the west end of the county and not the municipalities.
So is that the same like the rec district or the library or the rec district? They don't include like St. Mary's?
Rec district doesn't include St. Mary's. They can only propose property taxes. There's a different rule for every type of government.
But they can they tax outside their district?
No.
Well, so how does the fire authority is for the entire county, so they could.
Well, except for not the Evergreen
Evergreen.
side, we're covered by Evergreen Fire Rescue.
It's a Clear Creek Fire Authority is like most of Floyd Hill and West.
The Evergreen section of the county is served by a different special district.
Yeah. Jeremy, do you have anything that you want to say on this while it's up? Jeremy Jones, Assistant Fire Chief, also on Idaho Springs City Council.
Let's go all the way back to this real quick. So in 1988, the ESGID was formed. And at the time, that was the municipalities were covering the cost of fire and was pretty much exclusively, the county itself is not. So a solution for that, for those that live here, was to propose a district, which the ESGID, which covers like 347 of the 396 square miles of it, to fund those two items. Offset the cost of fire protection for the municipal partners that were paying for it, and allow for some ambulance funding. And that remained that way until the fire authority was formed in 1999. And at that point, the ESGID money only funded fire department. So that's why we're coming full circle here. So we've got a district that covers 346, 347 square miles that can fund both services effectively, which is why we're talking about this as a property tax perspective. And I know the highway is a big deal. We talked about the highway. From a fire perspective, only 38% of our entire call load is US 6, US 4970. To support it in perspective. It's not 80%, which is the perception. The reason it's perception is because that's calling the interstate inconveniences more than any call out there, and that's why you remember. So we have an aging population. About 67% of our call load in EMS is their call is 100% medical. Fire is about 67% as a medical component, and that's increasing year over year because our population is 65 years and older and increasing with every census. That's the reality. We're an aging community. Makes sense. So that's why we're talking about this today is a property tax increase. Even we'll say 7 mils. We'll use 7 mils as an example. If 5 mils goes to the fire authority, does that solve the fire authority's budgetary problems? No, it doesn't solve them all. But it does, it really solves a huge percentage of them, which allows us collectively time to figure out in the next 5 years what the next steps need to be. Does 2 mils solve EMS's problem? No, it's $149,000. They need 315, but it does offset the cost, part of the cost of a third crew, which does positively impact our delivery of services. Colton brings up that EMS has to rely on Gilpin ambulance 73 days. We'll give you a perspective of how that impacts you in a negative way as a citizen. If a Gilpin EMS ambulance is what's available in response to your house, you are going to pay a 10% premium on your bill for Gilpin EMS. That's how they are covering the cost, their additional cost to provide coverage for our county. So from our perspective, EMS and fire is, if we can get a third ambulance out there, it's staffed, which covers those calls, we're not using Gilpin except for the rare occasion, that reduces your ambulance bill by 10%. Right, for a third of so this is why we're talking about that between fire and EMS. And we worked with us on mitigation and all the stuff that we're doing. But collectively, both agencies have been deficit spending to provide the highest level of service possible. Kind of a detriment to the organization long term because we're each running out of money, running at a deficit. So that's why we're having this conversation tonight, to figure out one part of the puzzle. This is one part. What happens to the sheriff's office? What happens to the other county services are the subsequent parts of the problem that we collectively in this room have to solve. But we've kind of come down to, we can solve a percentage of the total problem with this, and which buys us time to keep working on the whole problem. And hopefully, we'll see the legislation changes. There's additional tax revenue opportunities. There's a whole bunch of stuff that could change that would benefit this whole conversation that doesn't exist today. That's why we're talking about mills.
Thank you, Jeremy. Rebecca, I think you have
Yeah,
something.
I just want a point of clarification. When I said that counties aren't allowed to deficit spend like the federal government does, when we're talking about deficit spending here, it means cutting into our reserves. If we have zero reserves, we can't deficit spend.
It's a great point. And just to add, while we're talking about the fire department, and then we're going to get to other questions and try to be more brief in how we answer. While we're talking about the fire department, it's important to know that we design the fire department's level of service to what it takes to show up to your home when it's on fire fast enough and with enough people to give ourselves a chance to put it out in a way that the firefighters are safe, right? So like when we're responding on the highway as a fire department, you know, we're doing that between calls. If there's a fire, everything is on that. And that's what we designed that system for. That's the top priority. And the cost that we're talking about is the cost of that. It's the cost of making sure that your home is saved and all of that. So I saw Katie, sir, I don't know your name, and I think I saw Candy.
Just a quick question about the, I think the fees for parking at trailheads you guys were mentioning. I forgot the page. I'm just curious, what kinds of trailheads that would cover, like what kinds of fees are we talking about? Have we gotten any sense of, you know, I know that's a big issue in Idaho Springs, of basically like what's the cost, perfect magical balance of where we make money, but we don't deter people from coming because of the costs. It's obviously scientific.
We're talking about two parking lots right now.
Okay.
There are two parking lots we're talking about. We're talking about Floyd Hill Open Space, where people show up and they bike, and there's no businesses in Clear Creek County right there, right? Rebecca says this every time we bring it up. She's like, we got to get a coffee shop up there. And we're talking about this parking lot, because this parking lot on the weekends is empty. And yeah, it's empty.
Yeah.
Well, we need to get I think, and we're looking at this, we need to get a contract with the same company that manages parking for Idaho Springs, have the same system so that you register once. And if you're local, it's just like it works in Idaho Springs, where once you're registered, and I'll admit it's kind of a pain getting registered. But then you pull up, you don't interact with the meters, you don't worry about anything. You've just got that privilege. So
why don't they park here on the weekends? Are there big signs saying no parking on the weekends?
Well, some people are parking and it's free.
Yeah, I could.
And it doesn't have to be free. I mean, a big thing like that, I think like a shift that this county needs to make in the way we think about ourselves is that we're worth it, right? We're an awesome place to be and we're worth it. So, but I'll stop the rant there because I know we're trying to get to other.
I mean, certainly both low resistance options, I think.
And to answer more generally, as far as the other open spaces, we would be restricted to ones that the county owns.
Right.
So the Forest Service lots, all those other ones, we can't do anything with.
Right.
Right. So it's really around county parking.
Sir, I'm sorry, I don't know your name.
Anyway, over the last couple of years, the quality of service of snow removal on 103 has dwindled. And I was wondering how you and CDOT work together, you know. There've been days, 4 days in a row that nobody came up our road, nobody came up 103 to plow.
Are you talking about 103 or West Chicago Creek?
Well,
But you guys do better on West Chicago than CDOT does on 103. So thank you.
That's good to know. One of the reasons we do these town halls is to hear that stuff because we will share that with CDOT and we'll ask them to do better. With respect to our own road and bridge team.
We're older than we used to.
Yeah, right. So with respect to our own road and bridge team, we've had a lot of turnover. Those CDL jobs are incredibly hard to hire. And Lilitha's over here nodding her head because she knows it's really hard to hire those jobs. We have increased wages on those jobs. Is it 3 times, Brian, in the last 2 years?
Yeah.
Same story in the transfer station. That is one of the areas that we fully funded the gap between what we are paying and what we know we need to pay. And we've got better staffing and you should see us do better there. I know the people that are on that team work really hard and they care a lot.
Right, but the issue is CDOT isn't doing their part too.
Yeah.
So we have to work on them.
Yeah, but it's good to know because we'll tell them.
And just to contribute with that a little bit, we're working on like rethinking about how we lease our snowplows because our fleet is aging so bad that we haven't seen a lot more mechanical issues with them, which could potentially take a crew down in a critical time. So we're working on modernizing the fleet to make sure that those problems are avoided too. Yeah.
And I understand I-70 has priority, but
Not for us.
not for us.
We're not plowing the I-70. Candy, did you have your hand up?
No, but kudos to the county road bridge crew and the recycling center.
That fund, kudos to the voters, right? Voters approved tax increase for that fund. And
And fire district as well.
And the fire authority.
Yes.
I totally support property tax for the fire district because property owners is the ones getting the services. That's where I live.
Yeah, we're all in the red zone, right?
who else? I know we scheduled this for 8 o'clock, but I'm not the only one that'll hang out and answer questions, I'm sure.
I just have a comment. I keep thinking, you know, what you talked about, the 50% is on I-70 for this third ambulance. And we're not going to get any help from the federal government or the state government. But did you read that Indiana just got permission to toll interstate highways?
No.
And that is, I think that's, we're talking about 2 to 3 years for these bills. Your state senators and congressmen may come up with something on tolling that may help fund all, you know, some of this stuff. I don't know the details on Indiana, if Indiana residents within the, you know, that are on a toll road within the state don't pay, if it's just people out of, I don't know how that works. But they did get the permission to do that.
And to Pete helped.
Well, and one thing that I learned with the I-70 that I didn't know before this job is that when people zig in and out and they pay those fines, that money goes to the safety patrol. So when you see I don't know who's sponsoring now, Geico, or when you see those out there, that's who helps respond to those. And, you know, we've talked about, we would like them to be more stationed, at least closer to Clear Creek, if not in Clear Creek, so that they can get response right away instead of, you know, fire authority or EMS maybe have already something taken care of before they get to that scene. So these are things that we talk to I-70 and
we're starting to wonder, not wonder, we're starting to build energy around the idea that maybe we could do a better job for you with that money.
yeah.
Lori?
I just want to thank you. A hardworking Board of County Commissioners. Thank you so much. Colton, that was a great presentation. George's point, though, about what county residents are already receiving needs to be in this.
That's what I said.
And help to be really mad about, you know, not getting our sheriff when we need our sheriff up on York Gulch.
And Evergreen.
Hearing that the sheriff may be responding a lot more than the fire authority is on I-70. So that is a message that we're getting, and it needs to be in here. so that we're reminded, not only is this a fabulous place to live, but, you know, we're getting a lot from our county. And, so I would very much encourage you to add that point that George made. And thank you so much for this town hall. This was very informative. Second time I heard it, I thought it was even better than the first time. So, and you've got two more to do.
We do. Yeah, thanks for coming back.
Anyone else? I don't want to silence anyone. This is, you can, our contact information is online. You can Google us. We don't have very many constituents compared to some of these bigger counties. So, you know, we're going to answer your calls.
It's also back there.
Related, just general question, because I like that you brought up the snowplow thing. Who do I talk to about crosswalks by the elementary school? Because that is chaotic for trying to walk across that street to get my kid to school. And it is scary and it needs to be better.
Talk to Idaho Springs, and probably Idaho Springs and the county need to talk to CDOT.
Okay.
And Idaho Springs is working really hard, and the county supports them on figuring out how to get a pedestrian bridge so you don't even have to mess with that. It's a lot of grant applications, a lot of energy behind that. You're going to see it happen. It's going to happen someday. I mean, we're assuming.
But I totally get.
Just that existing crosswalk, is that CDOT road there to 103 or is that Idaho Springs?
Jeremy's on city council.
It's CDOT. So the first struggle we had was even getting the schools open back in 20 to CDOT. That would be. So that's why you saw that at work. Zach, the ordinance officer, up in the morning for.
Yeah.
Make sure we have-
Yeah, all the time flashing lights, yeah.
And he continues to support that. So the next phase of that is crosswalk, we're adding, like we're doing lighting crosswalks in town. Same thing there. But we do have to go through a CDOT process to make any changes to the roadway. So that's in process.
Okay.
It's just incredibly slow.
Okay.
Like glaciers past us and then.
Can I talk to you? I'm
Yes.
just curious about what it is and also.
Love to talk about this.
Anything else? So I just want to finish with gratitude to you all. You just took a few hours out of your day to try to understand what's going on with the county. We're in these roles because we care about the services that people receive from the county. You're here in this room for the same reason. I just want to thank you for that.
Yep, thank you.
You're welcome.
And if you come 3 times, you're going to be labeled as a groupie.
It's very informative.
You have to adjust this.
Some technicalities. I'm sorry. If people, if you could please just one moment before you start talking. I just have to say some things for the record. This is technically a Board of County Commissioners meeting. They are legally required to ask for public comment formally. Is there any public comment? Hearing none, we're closing public comment. Thank you all for your comments, and we are adjourned.